Welcome to the Moon Collective Sanctuary. I'm Dr. Lydia Luna, and I invite you to join me on a journey of self-discovery, healing, and transformation as we explore the depths of our inner and outer world to unlock our truest potential. Welcome back to the Moon Collective Sanctuary podcast. My name is Dr. Lydia Luna, a licensed clinical psychologist and founder of the Moon Collective Sanctuary. I'm so excited to be back. Today, we're going to talk about attachment styles and use them as a framework to better understand our relationships with people, our bodies, and food. And I'm so excited to have my dear friend and colleague, Patricia Marucci. Thank you so much for being here today.
It's so good to be here with you.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so let me introduce you to Patricia. Patricia is a licensed therapist specializing in treating children, adolescents, adults, couples, and families. She's a multi-state licensed therapist and sees clients in New York, New Jersey, and California. With over 15 years of experience, some of her areas of expertise include eating disorders, addiction, and body image. So thank you. Thank you for making the time, for being here, and for all the great work you're doing.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I love coming out here and this opportunity to get to talk with you a little bit about the work I do and, just hopefully to help other people that are going through, something with their relationship, with their body, with food, with, substances, really all of it.
Love it. It's such an important framework. I think a lot of people are familiar. It's kind of become pop psychology, attachment style. So I love that we get to use them to explore all of these areas. Yeah. So let's get started. Please share about you, who you are, what your experience has been, and maybe did this lead you to this work?
As you said, I'm a licensed therapist. And what led me to this work is actually my own experiences that I've gone through. And I never really wanted to be a therapist. It never crossed my mind throughout my life. And, I wanted to maybe be an artist or do fashion or something, but...
Same here, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know if I knew that about you. That's so great. Yeah, so I think what brings us upon this work is always really interesting. And I think the journey I've had has made me able to connect with my clients in a way that I can understand some of their experiences that got them to the place that they're at, which is, trying to explore their own life and circumstances and relationships and really work towards living their best life. Well, I can share a little bit about my story. I grew up in New Jersey, and I grew up to two parents that were married for a while. And well, actually maybe up until I think I was 5 years old, and they went through a divorce, which actually wasn't entirely traumatizing to me. What ended up, I think, being more traumatizing was the fact that, the divorce led to my mom really struggling with her own trauma and taking kind of a step back in a way from parenting and, just out of survival and her trying to navigate a really tough situation. So, and which I can get into more later. So as a little girl, I had more of an anxious attachment style. What I noticed with my mom was that she wasn't okay. And as a little girl, I couldn't really put words to that, but I knew that, my dad wasn't around. And I was in about kindergarten when I think I started to have my own attachment, more of like an anxious attachment. And I knew my mom had to be okay because she was my primary caregiver. And so when I realized she was really struggling, my instincts told me, my focus as a little girl became, focused upon her and her needs. And, not that she asked me to, right? It's so intuitive. And so I started to really tune into her energy. And we talk about sometimes co-regulation. And I was really trying to regulate with a nervous system that was very traumatized.
And it makes sense, right? Because attachment styles are a type of survival mechanism. So for you, it makes sense to think your mom has to be okay in order for you to be okay. So let me take care of her because it also means we are going to be okay.
That's right. I remember in my kindergarten classes, I would cry every day before school. And I talked to my friend who actually went to kindergarten with me, and she's a therapist too. And we talk about it now, how she remembers that. And so my mom would have to stay and she would be in another room. And once I knew she was okay and settled, I feel like I could settle in. And so this was what I remember, early on, which would be more of an anxious attachment. We call it anxious preoccupied, which, it's really hard to connect with a nervous system or a person when they're kind of somewhere else because of their own trauma. And so it's like we're constantly like seeking and trying to find that source of connection. And I feel like when we can't find it, it can feel like an abandonment when it's really not. And it's confusing because the physical person is still there, right? So there was this feeling all the time of anxiety. And, at that stage in life, we don't have the words to say what I do now, as an adult looking back, which has been really healing too, to understand. And, in my own journey of therapy, to really get to understand what was going on. I shared I didn't actually set out to be a therapist, right? So when I was about, I think, 11 years old, and this is actually, I think, really important for people to understand who are going through something like this, that usually there's a sense of, or I should say oftentimes, overwhelm that comes, like overwhelm with either relationships or with life, that comes before an eating disorder is developed or an addiction, that leads us to this really desperate place where it's kind of like we don't want to go there, right? Because that feels counterintuitive in our higher self. That's not like a place that we want to go. But it seems like the only viable option at the time in the mind of, a child or a teenager who doesn't necessarily have the coping skills to navigate through these bigger issues. So when I was, I think, about 11 years old, I had 3 major things happen around the same time. And I don't really know exactly how old I was for each situation, but I remember there was like a before and an after. And that was my trauma. And so I found out that the reason that my parents got divorced, and, I had found out that, my dad had another child while he was married to my mom. And as a innocent 11-year-old, I mean, it really made me consider trust. And I felt like I couldn't trust anybody. I couldn't trust what I thought was real in life, which was my family, the way I saw it. So, and I was also a bit angry at my mom for bringing this information to me in a way that I didn't have any coping skills to handle it. And then it was never, brought up again. So I started to really question my reality and my relationships with people. Can I trust what I see and feel? Because I thought this was one way, and then I found out it was totally different.
Yes.
So that happened, and it was sort of sending me away from people. And then I had a situation happen where I had a sexual trauma. And the interesting thing about this that I can fast forward is that my brain actually disconnected myself from that trauma after it happened through my eating disorder. So what happened around that same age was my eating disorder, anorexia, started first. And then it led me to, because, I was pretty sick and disgusted, but I didn't have the words. So I just stopped eating. And then because I stopped eating, everybody around me started to comment on my body changing in a positive way, which was really confusing.
Right.
And so at that point, and that was when the eating disorder developed, it wasn't because of the trauma, but it was reaction people had to it. So then, and around that time, I think the other thing was my dad got remarried and I felt this big loss. And none of these things, well, I was going to say none of these things are innately negative. Yeah, I think the sexual abuse was definitely something a lot of people actually go through. And it was repetitive and I didn't know how to tell my mom, and I tried to tell her in different ways and she had other people advising her to continue to leave me with the same person. So it was such a wound that happened there. So attachment. So there's this isn't always the case with development of an eating disorder, but for me, there were a lot of things that I was backing away from people little by little.
Yeah.
So, and then, over time, just dabbling a bit with addiction and different things because the anorexia and then turned into bulimia, turned into, 10 years of really just living in this, having high school and grammar school and college completely in this place, that was a bit dissociative. So I think that really, now that I can say that and know that, really gives me insight into not only myself, but how to help other people that come to me with having had, a lot of different things happen and having had a hard time in understanding themselves and the role that these instances played in their life, because we're usually just confused. It happens, we adapt, we don't know what's happening. And then before we know it, we're in this place where, it's like hurting us tremendously. And we kind of have no other option, to get help other than, the ultimate option of, leaving this earth, right?
Yeah. How resilient of you to have experienced that and then still arrive at this place where you're using your experiences, what you've learned, and then are helping other people in this way. Because it's not easy, right, to work with people that struggle with eating disorders or addiction. And so how amazing that you came out of the darkness and then are able to be a light for those still in the darkness.
Yeah, I love it. It lights up my life every day. I feel like it enables me to relive my own recovery process that started after college, actually. And to connect it to my path of becoming a therapist, it wasn't immediate after I went through this. What ended up happening was I was in a really safe place, like in a treatment center, and I was getting help for my eating disorder and everything. I got there, I was like smoking cigarettes, like in an eating disorder, like doing everything you could think of. And, really trying to regulate my system from external things. If we talk about the somatic work and our window of tolerance, I couldn't find my way back to myself. There was so much that happened all at once. So I learned to look outward and to reach for different things to attempt to regulate my system. And so my whole life was really externally focused. But what happens with that is you become kind of a slave to your environment, right? And our environments are always changing. And so what my recovery journey over the last 24 years has been like is really learning about myself and learning how to stand on my own 2 feet in the world, how to regulate my system, how to have interdependent relationships, not codependent. And I really love my life today, which is such a gift.
But how did you get to that place where you felt like you were ready to make a change in your life? Was there a certain circumstance? Was it time? Was it somebody advising you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I had graduated college and I was a major in communications at the time and fashion. And I had just studied abroad in France. And I was like ready to have this career that was fashion, PR focused. And I was excited. I'm like, I'm going to take on the world.
Yes.
Yet I had, an eating disorder that was very secretive. And I had an addiction that I wasn't really telling anybody about. I mean, I think it was pretty obvious, I think, that I was always overshooting the mark a bit with, partying and all of that. However, it wasn't until I graduated college and it was time to really reconcile with the fact that I was a young adult and needing to go into the world and stand on my own 2 feet. And I had no idea how I was going to do that. So again, a series of events happened. My mom got remarried and sold her childhood home. I graduated college, and then I was looking for journalism jobs in New York City, and 9/11 happened. And it was just too much. Again, the system got overwhelmed, and I got so stuck in this pattern of, it was really my eating disorder that took me to the bottom, really bulimia, and I struggled with that for 6 years. And intermittently, I mean, I didn't think it was a huge problem which is funny to say, because it wasn't every day and it just came in waves. And I think it was one tool that I had to regulate my system. And so I hit this bottom where I thought I was going to die. I started to hear my ears ringing and I started to shake after, and I really knew I had to get help. However, what's interesting about eating disorders is we call them, egosyntonic, right? Where there's a part of it that's helping us and there's a part of it that's hurting us. But until we can start to trust in a system that actually can help us, that we feel like, okay, I'm going to start to let go of this other system because I'm starting to trust in this new way of doing things, it's really hard to let go of it. And so I definitely understand and have so much respect for people who, kind of go back and forth. And, I feel like I was really lucky to just be, I wanted the help and the clarity. I think I always wanted it. And once I started to find it, I just surrendered and I was like, I'm doing this. And then the interesting thing that this is like the defining moment that made me want to be a therapist was when I was in treatment and I was getting regular food consistently. I was in a safe place. I was around other people. I felt like I could really trust, the people that were there. And I started to have these dreams.
What dreams?
So I started to have these dreams, and the dreams were really about, they're kind of dark, so I don't know. But they were really about, I had these dreams. These were dreams that I was in this like frat house and I was trying to go to sleep. And I was scared to go to sleep because I thought somebody was going to hurt me in my sleep. So my therapist was telling me, you should write about those in your journal. And so I started to write about them. And that was when the memories of this abuse came back. And so what really blew my mind was the fact that my own brain hid from me this part of my life. And that was when I was like, I have to study psychology. The mind is so fascinating.
It is, yeah.
And so, and I started to really heal from that. But I think it was because my eating disorder was down and it was protecting me from knowing this part of myself. It was like a protector part. And it blew my mind. I was like, really I was 22 and I was like, what else is inside? Like I lit up. I really wanted to know and understand myself better and my relationships and people. And it gave me so much hope.
Yes, that makes sense. And that's great that you're able to identify all of this now through your work.
Yeah, it's been a journey.
So maybe this is a good moment to talk about the attachment styles for those that may not be familiar.
Definitely. So we have 4 main different attachment styles. We have secure attachment. So secure attachment really means that, my primary caregiver can leave and come back, and I can trust that they're going to come back. It means that I have a safe and consistent connection with my primary caregiver, and I know that they can be there for me. I understand that stuff in life can happen. And I can go to that source for comfort, regulation, support, guidance, and, all of the things we really need in our youth and also our young adult life to thrive and survive. And so the secure attachment is the goal. That's what we're looking for. And, and a lot of us, I think, have different things that interfere with that, different types of trauma. And so another attachment style, like I shared, was anxious or preoccupied. And what that means is that I don't know if you're going to be there, so I have to attach onto you really, really hard. I have to really just latch in, And when I was a kid, my mom told me they called me Elmer, like the glue, because I would stick to her, like really, like all the time, because I was afraid she was going to leave. And then as a kid, I didn't have the resources to know how to be in this big adult world. So I really needed her. So that's kind of what anxious or preoccupied attachment style feels like, and how it can show up in relationships today, and we can talk about relationships today, is that if I'm in a relationship, and I've done a lot of work on myself, so I think so. It's a journey, right?
Absolutely.
So, but in a sense, if I notice like a strong pull to somebody, I have to kind of tell myself, why don't you go inside and go internally into your own resources within, connecting to my own higher self, connecting to my spirit within, and the regulation that we all really have inside that we just kind of need to learn and have others reflect back to us.
Yes. It's easier said than done, right? Because I feel like my attachment style definitely has changed throughout different phases of life. I think I did have anxious attachment styles too growing up. Then it went to like avoidant. I think it fluctuates sometimes between avoidant and secure now for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When I'm by myself, I'm secure. Like I'm good.
Yeah.
But with all the work, I noticed like when I'm dating and I really like somebody, I feel like the anxious attachment stuff is coming up, that or avoidant, where I feel so much and I want to, like you said, almost like go in really strongly because I feel so deeply and I feel so much. I'm also a Cancer, so, but I have to like realize it's a lot. What is this about? And do we really want to do all this? Because I'm the one that's like struggling inside with all of this. So it's like you said, the regulation, that identifying that it's happening, noticing it.
Right.
And then doing something to calm ourselves so that we're not putting it on that person to make us feel better, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. And so you mentioned the avoidant attachment. So I can talk a little bit about that because I know that one that pretty well too. So avoidant attachment is kind of like, I think it oftentimes comes from anxious or stems off of anxious attachment because anxiety, like anxious attachment is like, I need you to be okay. Like I need you to be with me all the time to know I'm okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
That gets exhausting.
So exhausting.
Over time. And so I think we can kind of shift and the pendulum swings to the place of, you know what, I'm good.
It's like compensatory.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I don't need you. Like it's painful to need you because it's so like, I feel like I can't be okay without you. So you know what? I'm going to figure out a way to be okay all on my own. And that's kind of where the avoidant, really the overly self-reliant kind of attachment style comes in. And this can be hard in a different way in relationships because we all want and crave connection and safety and security. And when we're in a relationship and we have avoidant or we're dating somebody that has an avoidant style, we oftentimes can feel this coldness or that they're not really here or present, and sort of like people can pull back and that doesn't really feel like we're in a relationship. It can feel different. So it actually kind of creates a dynamic. I see a lot of anxious avoidant combinations where there's one person who's anxious and one who's avoidant. And it's sort of, they do the dance of like leaning in, pushing back, pushing back, leaning in. And I see this a lot working with couples, for different reasons. And what I see with addiction, people who have addiction to kind of jump there or eating disorders is we can gain a source of consistency from a substance or from food, right? If we're giving up on people, we're like, you know what, I haven't felt a safe, consistent, secure attachment to a person. What we can do if maybe one time we have like a glass of wine or we feel that warm fuzzy in the feeling, it's like, wait a sec. I don't have to go to people. I can get that warm fuzzy from a substance or a food, or something where we eat like a large quantity of something. And it's like, wait, this feels really fulfilling, but it's not really fulfilling our soul. It's really gives that an illusion. And so a lot of that, I think attachment, when people come in with eating disorders and addiction, I usually consider what their relationships are like. And oftentimes, I see trauma come in and a source of relational trauma, attachment trauma, disconnection from a caregiver for different reasons, and that sort of giving up on, finding trust and safety in relationships and more so leaning into other sources that are outside of ourselves.
Yeah. I love what you're saying too, because hopefully it allows us to have a compassionate lens towards people that are struggling with addiction. We tend to, not we, but sometimes people can be critical or judgmental of people that do struggle with addiction. But at the core of this, like you said, there may be a void or a longing for real connection that hasn't been available or accessible. So they're just, again, on survival mode, trying to see where can they get this. And that's an easy thing to get.
Yeah, definitely.
So what about disorganized attachment? I think that's important to also talk about. Yes. So can you share about what that is and how that looks like and how it affects maybe the body and even, eating?
So disorganized attachment is really the source of pleasure is also a source of pain. So if I have a parent who sometimes I go to them and I feel relieved and comforted, and then other times I go to them and I feel, distant, or if there's an abusive household, physically or something like that, it's really hard for a kid to know, is it safe to lean in? So we're constantly leaning in and then pulling back and leaning in and pulling back. And so what can happen, this can be so dysregulating for our system and with relationships, because we need relationships for survival.
Yes.
So if I'm in this pattern where I'm like leaning in and pulling out, it's going to be, first of all, probably exhausting. Second of all, the people we're forming relationships with are not going to really feel good to be on the other end of this attachment style, to kind of feel like, what's going on? Does this person into me? Are they not? Even friendships, I see this a lot with my clients who have eating disorders. It's a very common attachment pattern because, it's kind of like if there's, some kind of trauma, oftentimes it really leads people to, again, just like pull back and not necessarily trust in the relationships. And this one is really like, I can trust in it sometimes, but not all the time. So it can feel like a roller coaster, like in and out. And, there's a diagnosis personality disorder called borderline personality disorder, which is really, really all about just attachment, and I know that people who have this oftentimes exhibit a ton of pain because the source of pleasure in relationships that we get becomes also the source of pain. And so it's confusing because they know, I have to lean into a relationship, or I want to. Yet when I do that, it's so painful. And usually they're such beautiful, sensitive souls who develop this attachment style and also eating disorders.
My experience has been that people with borderline personality disorder have a very strong energy, like an essence about them. And it's like this idea that if they can channel it, in a way that is healthy, it could be really magnetic and powerful, and they could do a lot, I feel. But it's this disorganized attachment that creates issues. And then that seems to be the focus, right? Relationships and how do they make it right and how it's wrong. And it's just so mind consuming or all consuming that it doesn't allow for space for other stuff.
It's so true. It is. And I think the younger generation, I'm so impressed by working with them because they're so knowledgeable about mental health in a way that I think our generation was probably just starting to kind of get into it. And the clients I work with who know that they have this attachment style and can own it really are able to turn their lives around in a way where I find them to be some of the most passionate, creative, artistic, wonderful people to have relationships with, and I'm so inspired by my clients who have gone through not only this, but, all the different sort of attachments that can cause us distress, and then the addictions that come in the eating disorders, because to get through something like that and really land on the other end, I think is really one of the hardest things that people can do. And so, and I feel like these days there's so much help out there for people struggling with this. And, and I think more than ever, if we can reduce the stigma around, I know in our field even there's, stigma around some of this stuff that comes up, the different personality disorders and working with people. And our clients definitely pick up on that. And, I think if we can look at this through a more humanistic lens, if we're just people that, have gone through trauma and trying to find their way in relationships, which we all need.
Yeah. And how can we use this knowledge of attachment styles and how it affects our relationships with either people, food, our bodies, to use it like for our healing work or to help us heal?
Yeah.
What's the positive side of this?
It's a great question. I firmly believe that anything we go through is actually, if we can go through it and get to the other end, it's a beautiful channel for healing. I feel like our eating disorders, our addiction, our mental health struggles can really be the beginning of getting to know ourselves, getting to really start to look inward, where you're setting a foundation for yourself that is going to serve you, later on. And I truly believe that, because I feel like although I had a really tough beginning of life, once I started my recovery journey, I feel like I've had the best life, kind of second half of life and I feel like I see that a lot with my clients, because what we need to be adaptable in the world and to have like resilient lives, we all learn it at different times, those tools and skills. But I think, if we can use these struggles as a pathway to really developing into, the human beings that we all are, it can be a beautiful thing. And there's so many different lens that we can work with eating disorders, with food and body image, with our relationship with people, that are out there. I do a lot of psychoeducation just about attachment with my clients. I also love to work with a somatic lens, because a lot of the time, if we're uncomfortable in our bodies because we're hurting our bodies with food or substances, we're going to retreat to our heads. A lot of the time, a lot of us end up being overthinkers, and it's hard to connect with a person who's in their head all the time. And so a lot of the work I find that's like fundamental and a great sort of foundation to any other kind of work is really doing that, just like the nervous system regulation, also just getting comfortable, when we go into our bodies, what's the first thing we notice? And oftentimes we're going to notice pain first because of survival. Our system is always tracking what's painful for our survival, in the sense that we need to know what's wrong.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, feel that, but then drop a little bit further. Can you find a place that feels okay? And there's always a place that feels okay. Even if it's a little like fingernail or something, just find that place, because what happens is if we're uncomfortable in our bodies, we're again going to retreat to our head. So if we can find a place in our body that's uncomfortable to start with, and then we can find the comfortable place, we can, instead of leaving our body, shift our attention to that pleasant place.
I love that.
And building that capacity internally, really getting to build our inner world, which I think is really the depth of what we're here to do.
When you say that to me, I'm like, the power of the mind, if we could just master this, where, like you said, there's the duality, both are going to exist, potentially pain and comfort. And it's where we shift our focus that we will notice it. And yes, for survival, we need to know what's wrong, what's not right, where the pain is. That's important. We don't want to ignore that, but we don't want to ignore what is working, what does feel okay, and maybe learning how to hold both.
That's right.
And embracing both.
It's so true. And it's such a metaphor for life, right? Like it's really, we can look around and notice like all the beauty, I'm sitting here and there's a beautiful like greenery outside and there's so much there. And we can focus on that. We can use it as a resource,
Yes.
And then there's also, the stuff around us that triggers us. And in somatic experiencing work, we call it the trauma vortex and the counter vortex. The counter vortex is anything other than trauma. And so it's sort of that idea that we heal between these activation and settling cycles that happen, and really tracking them, and sort of leaning in. And it's, there's a lot to say about this. So I don't know how much time we have, but I would definitely recommend starting there and starting slow, because a lot of the time I've worked with many people who can't find a resource inside their body at all where they feel okay and safe. And so in those cases, we're oftentimes looking for external things. Like I've had clients grab a picture of, their children or something outside of them that they can look at and feel settled. And we work towards, can we stay in the body for a moment and just notice, and if not, let's work with that. So I love that lens. It's not for everybody. I also think a lot of DBT can be super helpful in treating eating disorders. I work from a humanistic lens, which is very much like the problems that have happened in our life are the result of, the experiences that we've had, to not really pathologize and to help people understand themselves in that, if we had better tools, we would have used them. And we can't judge ourselves early on from the adult space that we're sitting in today, because I always say it's like you're a senior in high school and you're like, when I was a freshman, why didn't I do all these things? It's like, because the freshman wouldn't know that you've had 4 years to like grow into this place. And so I really want to hold a big net of self-compassion and really self-forgiveness and, really just journeying from this place, moving forward and,
Yes.
Knowing and understanding ourselves.
Yeah. So what's coming to mind for me is, how does one know if they have some kind of eating disorder or disordered eating or even body image issues? Like, how does one even know that? Like, where's the line between what's normal,
right?
Not normal, but typical health, slightly unhealthy, where it crosses over to a disorder?
That's a really good question. So there's a lot of us that have disordered eating. Maybe we eat for reasons other than nourishment or hunger. There's those of us who maybe eat for pleasure or, when we're not hungry. And there's a whole continuum, because we're not pathologizing any of it. We're human and we're here to learn about ourselves and the world that we live in. We're sort of dropped here and it's like, here you go. So we're here, we're all learning, right? So, and a lot of us do that. And I always say, if it's not a problem for you, then it's not a problem, most of the time. However, there's a caveat to that, because sometimes, we can be in denial and
That's true. That's true.
But the idea is sometimes it's a problem for everyone else in our life and not us. And
Right.
we want to look at that. But sometimes it's like, I hear this like every once in a while, I will, go through something and reach for food or not eating or whatever. And it's kind of like, that's probably human. That's probably us finding our way towards regulation. And, eating disorders are clinical mental health diagnoses that require a certain set of criteria to meet to diagnose somebody with them. And typically what reflects that is the impact that it's having on our life functioning. Mm-hmm. And so there's different sort of variations of what that could look like. And OCD too is in this realm, and some people find eating disorders and addiction to be like a cousin to OCD or a parallel. So with these situations, we're looking at, like some of these things can actually be functional in life and they're not hurting anybody. They're not hurting me and they're not hurting anyone in my life. And I say for those, like, okay, that's part of what makes you you. That's right. Part of the quirks that, kind of that we all have, but if we're experiencing problems in our relationships, problems with our health, mm-hmm. right? Problems in our social functioning, work, and just our fulfillment and enjoyment in life, then that's something we want to look at. Because, I feel like we're here as mental health professionals to really support and help people to live their best lives and to look at, what's getting in the way of that, and we're not always ready to get help, and that's okay. So I work with a lot of people who, we work with the stages of change, and there's some of us that it's still working. And so we do a little bit of harm reduction work.
Okay.
Which is really like, it's not black and white, it's not all or nothing. It's basically saying like, okay, what's causing you the most harm now? Let's look at that. Let's work on that first. Let's work from that place, and expand upon that.
Okay, I have a question. So what if hunger isn't really for food, but for connection, safety, and love? What can we tell somebody who may be using food to compensate for for a lacking of any of these things?
Well, I would say first, like, welcome to the human race. Like we all sort of go there. I don't want to pathologize too hard. But if it's getting in their way where it feels like they're not having fulfilling relationships, or they're not getting the the beauty that comes with, sharing with a human and getting that comfort and love and security that comes from relationships. So what I usually would say first is like, let's look at maybe how you can, first of all, identify those moments where you reach for the item, whatever that is, rather than a relationship or connection. And it doesn't always have to be a relationship. Sometimes we can reach for our self-soothing plan and develop the relationship with ourselves.
Love it.
Other times we can reach for, distress tolerance skills. And I love inviting my clients they all laugh because I send them a list. It's like 300 and something pleasurable activities you can do.
I need that list.
I'll send that to you. Okay. So it's like, let's start building pleasure, kind of that counter vortex. Let's start building that rather than someone being like, you have to let go of the source of pain that's also providing you comfort. It's like, hold off, we're going to get there,
Yes.
But before that, let's maybe start to look a little bit at how we can expand upon and build capacity for what feels good. There are people that doesn't necessarily work for because eating disorders are really serious. They're deadly mental health disorders. And, and they have a high, sadly, like mortality rate, as it goes for mental health disorders. And so there are some people who really do need to enter into a higher level of care, who need that wraparound support. I'll work with people sometimes on an outpatient level and recommend that if I think that they could, suffer less or get benefit. Some of them will take it. Others want to try to continue in outpatient. And a lot of it depends on, I'm always working with a medical doctor, a dietitian, and oftentimes a family therapist and other different people. Although I am a family therapist, I like to bring in, someone a little more neutral, especially with adolescents. I think that is important to consider too. And I would recommend, really getting an assessment to have somebody who's qualified to objectively look at your situation and decide if, it's time to seek that higher level of care, because we're not going to probably be the ones to know that. We're going to probably think we're okay.
Right.
There's a high level of denial, in that. So, and also similar to addiction, we're always like, we're fine. And our life is falling apart because we have a high capacity to hold distress,
Yes.
So I think, if we can surrender a little bit and get an outside source that we can trust enough to give us some honest feedback clinically about where we're at, that can be really, really helpful in, guiding us to the kind of help that is going to actually help. Because if we're at the wrong level of care, we might just be like in a labyrinth of trying to like find our way out of it, or a merry-go-round that keeps going in circles. So we really want to try to, really muster up some bravery and trust and get some outside, feedback, and just to have another set of eyes on your situation.
Yeah, no, that's great information. So everything you're saying, I love it. It's so informational. And I hope people that are listening can reflect and introspect and be like, okay, is this an area that I need to pay attention to? I loved also what you said about sometimes we're not aware that something can be happening. So it is important to also take input from those that are closest to us and stay open and surrender. Right?
Yes. I have that tattooed on my foot.
Oh, you do?
Surrender. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. It's when you let go that you can truly see the magic of life take place and take over. And it really is beautiful, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's really like, I think that's kind of the spiritual part in this whole process of really just trusting in life and being able to, if we can't trust people for a moment, that's okay.
Yes.
Can we trust the seasons? Can we trust the moon cycles? Can we trust a consistency that is outside of ourselves? And I, for one, love to follow the moon cycles. And, I learned probably 10 or 15 years ago about the impact they have on the ocean, tides and everything. And it blew my mind, just how it's all interconnected. And so it's really okay if you don't trust people now. I went through that too. And I think a pathway to healing can be to trust something, whatever that is.
Yes.
If it's, when I lived out here in SoCal, I loved going to the ocean and just taking in, I think that was, a source of nature that was bigger than myself.
Yes, so healing. I love going to the ocean too when I need to feel grounded.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so we can find many different things. I think we can all find something that can help us feel settled in life, something we can believe in, that's bigger than us.
Yes.
But no matter what that is.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to share 3 surprising facts about attachment theory. So one is that genetics play a role too. Even though attachment is often thought of coming purely from early relationships, twin and molecular genetics studies suggest a non-trivial inheritable component, up to 45% of the variability in anxious attachment and about 39% of the variability in avoidant attachment may be explained by genetic factors. That was interesting. And also the cool thing about a secure base is that secure base behavior is wired for exploration. So one core idea from Bowlby is that having an available responsive attachment figure gives the infant, and later the adult, a secure base from which to explore the world. In other words, it's not just about closeness. Attachment supports autonomy and exploration. And finally, which this is a more commonly known fact, is that attachment styles aren't fixed. While many people talk about being anxiously attached or avoidant, attachment theory describes tendencies, not permanent identity. People can shift attachment patterns over time with relational experiences, therapy, and healing work.
Absolutely. I feel like that's the most beautiful thing. I work a lot with couples and families and even individuals and myself too. I mean, bore witness to the fact that we can create in the present moment relationships the way that we want them to be. And it's beautiful when we can find, friends or a significant other or even our parents. A lot of the time, we can grow together.
Yes.
And it's magical, I think, when we can realize, what is possible and that we can really shift, I would say, all of this into a place that can be better than we ever imagined. I always say beyond our wildest dreams. And, I would say even for my own life today, it looks in a way different than maybe what I would have thought that how it would have looked, but in all the best ways, and I think that is for a lot of people, the idea that we can really plug into, health and wellness and spirit, and that can guide us to really digging into having or creating really relationships that really kind of supersede our fixed patterns that we've had. And that's a huge part of why I love the work. I
love it.
Privileged, to witness people do this all the time. And it's truly incredible.
Well, we're getting ready to wrap up, but I always ask my guests, is there anything that you want to leave with the audience? A message, something?
I would say that, we all have stuff, nobody's perfect. We all, we're humans, we're humans and we're here on earth. And I believe we're here to learn and to grow and to understand what it means to be human. So I would say, to really try to find people, first of all, that are like-minded, that are going to support your growth path and your recovery if you're, dealing with this. And I would also say that, if you're in a moment that can feel like the dark night of the soul or the depths of the darkness, which I know we can often go to when we're struggling with this, just to know that no matter how dark it gets, you have the capacity to really get that bright too, and to have the opposite of that too. Kind of like we have, the sun and we have the moon, we have the light and the dark. So the beautiful thing is, I think those of us who go really deep into pain can really illuminate in ways that we never would have thought possible. So I just want to encourage anybody that's on this journey to keep going and to, again, just find people who believe in you and who you feel understand you and support you. And I think anything is possible.
Amen to that. Thank you.
I believe that in the depths of my soul.
Yes. And I'm sure you've experienced it. You lived it, so you know.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to make sure people are able to reach you should they want to work with you and connect. So tell us, where can they find you on Instagram, your website?
Yes. So I have an office in New York City, Midtown Manhattan, and New Jersey right now live that I see in person. And I work virtually with people out here on the West Coast in California. So you can find me at my website, which is patriciamartucci.com. Or I also have a YouTube page, which is at Patricia Marucci 6454.
Great.
And I hope you can come by and say hi. And I would look forward to a conversation or just, a connection.
Well, thank you so much for making the time to be here, for sharing everything you did today. There are a lot of nuggets of wisdom in what you shared. So I hope people can really take in what you shared. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. I'm so glad I got to come here and do this with you.
Yes.
And I love your podcast. And I think you bring so much love and light to so many people.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Well, thank you. And thank you to the listeners. We look forward to seeing you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining me on the Moon Collective Sanctuary. Remember, your journey to a more fulfilling and empowered life continues beyond this episode. Until next time, may you remember who you are and stay open to embrace all that life has to offer. Continue your personal transformation beyond this podcast. Explore our range of healing services and upcoming events at mooncollectivesanctuary.com.